The air inside the luxury hotel was cool and scented faintly of sandalwood and money, a place where silence was a sign of wealth and discretion was the norm. Vanessa Reed moved through the lobby with the confident grace of someone who had long grown accustomed to admiration. Cameras loved her, magazines worshipped her, and business circles whispered her name with respect. In the last decade, she had built a fashion empire from scratch, transforming her name into a global brand. She was the kind of woman who made heads turn and hearts pause. But behind the sharp heels, diamond bracelets, and confident stride lay the quiet pulse of someone who had fought hard to bury her past. It wasn't just ambition that had made her strong. It was survival. 10 years ago, she had walked away from a life that once defined her, and from the man who had once been her entire world. That man was Darius Cole. The memory of his voice, deep and warm, was something she had carefully locked away. They had met long before success had sharpened her edges. Back then, Vanessa was a dreamer, juggling 2 jobs and studying fashion design at night, while Darius was the kind of man who found beauty in the ordinary. He was a mechanic who loved jazz, the smell of rain, and the way her eyes softened when she talked about fabric. He was steady, kind, and believed in her when no one else did. Together, they had built dreams out of late-night takeout and broken promises, but reality had a cruel way of reminding them that love didn't always pay the bills. When Vanessa's ambitions began to grow beyond the small apartment they shared, their differences widened into a chasm. She wanted more, and Darius couldn't follow her into the world she was chasing. The night she left him was the night she vowed never to look back. Now, 10 years later, that promise was about to break. The charity gala she was attending wasn't supposed to bring ghosts from the past. She had come to make an appearance, to sign a partnership deal, to smile for cameras. But fate, as it often does, had its own script. As she crossed the marble floor toward the elevator, she heard a familiar voice, low, calm, with the same rhythm that once anchored her restless heart. For a brief second, time twisted. The noise of the lobby faded. The weight of success slipped from her shoulders, and all she could hear was that voice. She turned, her breath catching. There he was, Darius. He looked older, but in a way that time makes someone real rather than faded. His hair carried faint traces of gray, his build still strong, his skin deep and warm under the soft lights. He wore a simple suit, not designer, not trendy, just clean and purposeful. But it wasn't the clothes that struck her, it was his eyes. They hadn't changed. They still carried that same calm depth, that same quiet understanding that once made her feel seen in ways money never could. For a moment, neither spoke. It was as if 10 years had folded into a single breath between them. Vanessa felt her heart stumble. All the emotions she thought she'd outgrown came rushing back, uninvited and overwhelming. The years apart, the success, the awards, none of it prepared her for this collision with the past. She forced a smile, the kind that looked perfect in photographs but hollow in truth. Darius, she said softly, testing his name like a forgotten melody. He smiled, and that smile undid something inside her. Vanessa, he replied, his tone steady but filled with an unspoken history. They talked, awkwardly at first, about the usual things people say when trying to hide deeper wounds. Work, life, the years in between. She learned that he now owned a small auto repair shop in a quiet part of town. Nothing fancy, but his eyes glowed with quiet pride when he spoke about it. He mentioned mentoring neighborhood kids, teaching them skills, giving them hope. It was the kind of life she once thought too small, too ordinary. Yet now, as she listened, she felt something stir, envy, maybe even regret. He had peace. She had success. And somehow, she realized, they weren't the same thing. Every time he laughed, she found herself drawn back to the warmth of who he used to be, who they used to be. It was disorienting how quickly her polished composure began to crumble. She found herself remembering the nights they'd spent talking until dawn, his hand tracing lazy circles on her wrist, the sound of rain against their window, the promises whispered in half-light. She remembered the arguments, too, the pain of ambition pulling her away from simplicity, the way he looked at her that last night, hurt but still loving. As the conversation deepened, she caught glimpses of something else in his voice, a kind of quiet forgiveness. It unsettled her. She didn't know if she deserved it. She had left him behind for a life she believed was better, and yet here he was, content without the world's applause. In his silence, she heard everything she'd been avoiding. The truth that love, once genuine, never truly disappears. It transforms, waits, lingers beneath the noise of years. People around them glanced curiously, some recognizing Vanessa, others noting the strange familiarity between her and the man who didn't quite fit the scene. Yet in that crowded lobby, it felt as if they were the only two people left. The weight of time pressed around them, and she could feel herself being pulled back into a moment she thought she had escaped. She wanted to say something, anything to explain why she had left, to justify the choices that led her here. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself looking at him, realizing that while she had been busy chasing the world, he had quietly found meaning. The silence between them was thick with memories. Every glance, every unspoken thought hung suspended, fragile and full of possibility. She wondered if he ever hated her for leaving, if he ever imagined her name when fixing cars, or if he'd long stopped thinking about her at all. She didn't ask. She wasn't sure she could bear the answer. But she did know one thing. Seeing him again had stirred something deep inside her, something she had buried under success and luxury. It was like seeing herself through his eyes again. Stripped of glamour, reduced to the woman she once was, raw, flawed human. As they stood there, the echoes of the past vibrating between them, Vanessa realized that time hadn't erased what they once shared. It had only softened the edges, replaced pain with nostalgia, regret with a quiet ache. For the first time in years, she felt vulnerable, and it terrified her. The woman who commanded boardrooms and dictated trends suddenly found herself lost in the simple presence of a man who once loved her without conditions. The air around them felt charged, heavy with what could have been and what still might be. She didn't know what would happen next, only that the carefully built walls of her life had begun to tremble. Darius had never been the kind of man who envied success. His life had been shaped by simplicity, hard work, and quiet dignity. After Vanessa left, he had gone through the expected stages of heartbreak, anger, disbelief, numbness. But eventually, he had found peace in the rhythm of his hands and the sound of wrenches turning in his shop. The small garage he opened on the outskirts of the city became more than just a workplace. It became his sanctuary. He worked with honesty, earned his customers' trust, and poured himself into mentoring local kids who came from broken homes or rough neighborhoods. To them, he wasn't just a mechanic. He was a teacher, a father figure, someone who saw potential where the world saw trouble. The garage smelled of oil and metal, but to Darius, it smelled of redemption. Every now and then, someone would bring in a luxury car, polished, loud, the kind Vanessa might have driven, and it would sting a little. A faint reminder of the world she now lived in. He never spoke about her to anyone, never mentioned her name, but her memory was woven into small things. The playlist that still had her favorite song, the old mug she had painted when they were broke, the sketch of her first dress design tucked in a drawer he never opened. He told himself that people change, that love was just a lesson, not a destination. Yet some nights, when the world fell quiet, he'd still find himself wondering how she was. The years had been kind to him in some ways and cruel in others. He had learned to live without luxury, to find beauty in the small victories, fixing a difficult engine, seeing one of his students land a steady job, or simply sitting outside his shop watching the sun dip behind the rooftops. He carried himself with quiet pride, never bitter, never broken. So when fate brought Vanessa back into his life that evening at the gala, it wasn't just surprise he felt. It was a flood of emotions he thought he'd buried under time and grease-stained hands. He hadn't planned to be there. The charity event was sponsored by a local community foundation that had donated tools and funds to his mentorship program. He was invited as a guest of honor, a token of gratitude for his contribution. It was supposed to be a simple evening, one where he'd smile politely, shake hands, and leave early. But when he saw her, dressed in a deep emerald gown, elegant, poised, and glowing under the chandelier light, His world stopped for a heartbeat. Vanessa Reed, the woman he once thought he'd grow old with, the woman who had chosen dreams over love. She looked different and yet the same. Her hair was shorter now, her posture straighter, her eyes sharper. There was a confidence in her that only success could bring. But beneath it, he sensed something else. An exhaustion, maybe even a longing. She caught his gaze, and in that instant, he saw her freeze. The air between them thickened, heavy with recognition and memories that time had failed to erase. For a brief second, he considered walking away. But something in her expression, shock, hesitation, vulnerability, made him stay. Their first words felt like fragments of a past life awkwardly stitched into the present. She smiled, polite and composed, the way people do when they're trying not to tremble. He spoke softly, his tone steady but cautious, as if afraid that saying too much might shatter whatever fragile balance existed between them. The conversation flowed unevenly, dipping between surface talk and uncomfortable silences. She mentioned her company, her travels, her achievements. He spoke of his shop, the kids he mentored, his quiet life. On the surface, their worlds couldn't have been more different. She was surrounded by wealth and glamour. He was rooted in simplicity and purpose. Yet, as they talked, an invisible thread began to pull them closer again. Vanessa's laughter, something he hadn't heard in 10 years, echoed softly between them, unguarded for a brief moment. It hit him unexpectedly, how much he had missed that sound. He noticed how her eyes still crinkled at the corners when she smiled, how her voice softened when she spoke of her late mother, how her hands still moved when she talked, expressive and alive. He found himself studying her, not as the millionaire the world saw, but as the woman he once held close in the dark, whispering about the future. But what struck Darius most wasn't how much she had changed. It was how much he hadn't. He was still the same man who believed that wealth meant nothing without peace. The same man who valued sincerity over status. As he listened to her stories about luxury events and board meetings, he realized that behind her words was something hollow. She had everything, yet she sounded tired. Her laughter was polished but strained, her confidence like armor. He could see through it because he had known her before she learned to hide behind perfection. At one point, their conversation drifted toward the past. She asked if he ever regretted their time together. He hesitated, then shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "It made me who I am." She looked at him, surprised, as if expecting anger or resentment. But there was none. Darius had long made peace with her leaving. He understood that she had been chasing something she needed to find on her own, even if it meant breaking his heart. The forgiveness in his tone disarmed her, made her eyes glisten with emotions she didn't want to show. He told her about the kids he worked with, how some reminded him of himself, dreamers caught between struggle and hope. He described how teaching them gave him purpose, how it filled the space that once belonged to her. She listened quietly, her expression softening with every word. For the first time that night, she didn't feel like the accomplished businesswoman she had become. She felt like the young woman who once sat beside this man in their small apartment, believing that love was enough. As the evening went on, he noticed how people gravitated toward her, admiring, whispering, idolizing. Yet she kept glancing back at him, as if seeking something no amount of praise could give her. It was strange. He, the man she had once left behind, had something she seemed to need now. It wasn't money or fame. It was calm, authenticity, the grounding presence of someone who didn't want anything from her. For Darius, it was both bittersweet and healing. He saw the woman he had loved living the life she thought she wanted, only to realize it hadn't given her what she truly needed. When the event drew to a close, she lingered near him instead of joining the others who waited to speak to her. He could feel the tension in the air, that unspoken mix of longing and regret that comes when two people realize they're standing at the intersection of what was and what could have been. He didn't reach for her hand, though every instinct wanted to. He knew better now. Some gestures, no matter how natural they feel, belong to another time. But he couldn't deny the ache that returned, the gentle pull of old love refusing to fade. As she looked at him, something in her eyes shifted. It wasn't pity, and it wasn't pride, it was realization. She saw him not as the man she left behind, but as someone she had underestimated. The life he had built wasn't rich in material things, but it was full of meaning, connection, and peace. And for the first time, she seemed to envy him. The millionaire envying the mechanic. The woman who had conquered the world, yearning for the simplicity of a love she once let go. As the night air settled outside the gala, Vanessa found herself unable to shake the image of Darius standing there, composed and unbothered, as though time had left him untouched. Something about his calm presence, his quiet dignity, gnawed at her long after the event ended. She sat in her car, the city lights flickering across her face, her reflection distorted in the tinted glass. For years, she had measured her worth through success, through the gleam of awards, magazine covers, and billion-dollar deals. Yet tonight, sitting in silence after seeing the man she once loved, all of it felt strangely hollow. She had conquered the world, but she couldn't escape the feeling that she had lost something irreplaceable along the way. The laughter, the late nights, the tenderness, all replaced by board meetings, investors, and the relentless hum of ambition. Darius, without even trying, had reminded her what it meant to feel human again. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, his face appeared. The warmth in his gaze, the ease in his voice, the forgiveness that lingered between his words. It all played in her mind like a melody she couldn't turn off. The contrast between their worlds was glaring. She lived in a penthouse where the city skyline looked like diamonds scattered across the night. He worked in a small garage where the scent of oil and metal filled the air. Yet for all her wealth, she had never felt as content as he seemed to be. That realization cut deep, more deeply than she wanted to admit. The next morning, Vanessa made a decision she hadn't planned. She told her driver to take a detour far from the glass towers of her empire into the quieter part of the city where Darius's garage was located. The car slowed as they entered a modest neighborhood lined with small shops and weathered buildings. When she stepped out, her heels clicked against the uneven pavement, drawing curious stares from passers-by. She looked out of place in her tailored suit and designer bag, a symbol of luxury standing before a rusted metal gate that read, Cole's Auto Works. Inside, the sound of tools echoed against the walls, and she spotted Darius bent over the hood of a car, his hands working with the same focus she remembered from years ago. He didn't notice her at first, and for a moment she simply watched him, the concentration on his face, the easy way he moved, the quiet command he had over his space. It was the same calm she once leaned on when the world felt too loud. When he finally looked up and saw her, his surprise was evident but brief. A soft, knowing smile crossed his face. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. Vanessa hesitated, unsure how to begin. She wasn't used to not being in control. "I was in the area," she lied, and they both knew it. He chuckled, shaking his head slightly, and motioned for her to step inside. The garage was cluttered but alive, a place built from effort and purpose. Photos lined one wall, showing Darius with groups of young men and women, smiling with pride beside cars they'd fixed together. She walked closer, tracing one of the frames with her eyes. "You did all this?" she asked softly. "We did," he corrected, his tone humble yet firm. They just needed someone to believe in them. There was something in his words that made her throat tighten. It had been so long since anyone had spoken without an agenda, without trying to impress her or win her favor. She realized how much she missed authenticity, the kind of sincerity that existed in moments like this. She turned to face him fully. "You look happy," she said, and though her voice was steady, her heart wasn't. He studied her for a long moment before replying. "I am. Took a while to get here, but I found my peace." Then, almost gently, he added, "What about you?" The question hit harder than she expected. Vanessa opened her mouth, ready to give her usual rehearsed answers about fulfillment and legacy, but nothing came out. Her silence was enough for him to understand. She wasn't happy. Not really. The realization that he could still read her so easily both comforted and unsettled her. He didn't press further, didn't judge. Instead, he handed her a cup of coffee from an old thermos, the same way he used to on cold mornings before she left for work back when they shared their small apartment. It was such a simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken emotions. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, life, time, mistakes. He spoke about purpose and community. She spoke about exhaustion and the emptiness that came with achieving everything yet feeling nothing. For the first time in years, she wasn't Vanessa Reed, the mogul. She was just Vanessa, sitting in a garage beside the man who once taught her that love didn't need luxury to feel infinite. Somewhere in that conversation, something inside her began to unravel. When she finally stood to leave, she reached into her purse, pulled out an envelope, and placed it on his workbench. "For your program," she said softly. "It's not charity, it's gratitude." He frowned slightly, hesitant to accept it. But when she met his gaze, he saw the sincerity there. This wasn't a gesture of pity. It was an offering, a bridge between their worlds. The gesture wasn't just about money, it was her way of acknowledging him, of saying thank you for being the one thing she never truly lost. Even when she thought she had, he accepted it silently. His eyes filled with a mix of surprise and emotion. There was something almost sacred in the moment, a quiet understanding that forgiveness had already passed between them, wordless but profound. Before she left, she turned back and looked at him once more. "You always believed in me," she said softly. "Even when I didn't deserve it." He smiled gently. "You just needed to find your way." "We all do." As she walked out into the daylight, something inside her shifted. The city no longer looked as cold. For the first time in a long time, she felt light, as if the weight she'd been carrying for years had begun to lift. Her gesture had changed something, not just for him, but for herself. It wasn't redemption in the grand sense, but it was a start. She realized that real wealth wasn't measured by what she owned, but by what she gave back, by the connections she could rebuild, and the hearts she could heal, including her own. That evening, Darius found her envelope still sitting unopened on his workbench. He finally tore it open and found not just a check, but a handwritten note inside. The handwriting was elegant, familiar, and shaky at the edges. It read, "For the kids who dream like we once did. Build them something that lasts." He stared at it for a long time, then smiled. It wasn't the money that moved him, it was the sentiment. She hadn't come to flaunt her success or seek closure. She had come to reconnect, to give back a piece of the kindness he had once given her. And though neither of them said it aloud, both knew that her gesture had closed a circle that had been open for 10 long years.